So we all came here today to talk about some of the nuances and challenges associated with Salesforce projects and how process maps can really transform our experience when managing a Salesforce project and bring things under control. And more often than not, Salesforce professionals forget about not only the existence, the utilization of process maps. Many Salesforce professionals, project managers, BAs, Salesforce admins were never even taught how to create process maps, let alone the importance of them and how incredibly transformative a process map can be to your Salesforce projects. And really, that's what we're going to unpack in this 30-minute session. Before we get started, let's just cover a couple of quick housekeeping items. For some of you, this might be your first LinkedIn audio live event as an attendee. For me, it's the first one that I am actually hosting. I've attended many, but this is the first time I'm actually sitting on this side of the table and actually hosting it. But either way, I want to make sure that this is the best possible experience for all of you. So this LinkedIn Live audio event is an interactive platform. I highly encourage your participation, whether it's through emojis or posting messages on LinkedIn on the feed for this particular live event. You can post comments even now during the session, as well as direct messaging myself or other attendees. And you can also raise your hand if you have a question you want to be brought on to the stage. And I highly encourage you to leverage that if you're comfortable with it and you actually have a question that you want to ask to everyone. So it will allow me to open up the mic for you where you can unmute yourself and actually be part of the discussion. So if you want to ask a question or contribute to the discussion, there's a feature to raise your hand. When you raise your hand, a notification will pop up on my end and I can permit you to speak. So simply click on the raised hand emoji to get in line. Once you're given the floor, I request that you keep your comments brief and relevant to maintain a smooth flow of conversation. We might have to move you back into listening mode and back into the audience if the maximum number of speakers, which is 17, is reached. So don't worry either way. You can always raise your hand again if you want to contribute again to the conversation. Remember that we want to be respectful and keep a positive environment for everyone involved. So please make sure that your microphone, if you are on stage, please make sure that your microphone is muted when you're not speaking so we don't have any background noise. By the way, I've been guilty of this myself. One of my granddaughters crying in the background, the dog barking in the background. So it's hard to remember it in the moment. So if needed, I can mute any attendee in order to minimize some background noise. And lastly, don't forget to network. You can always follow or message any event attendees by simply clicking on their profile pictures right here on LinkedIn. So remember, the key is flexibility. I'll respond in real time if anything unplanned happens. And that's one of the beauties and one of the exciting elements of doing a live event is that you never know what might happen. More often than not, magic happens, not problems at all. Anyway, let's get started on focusing on the journey from chaos to clarity. So today, we're diving into the transformative power of process mapping and the 7 key benefits for leveraging process maps in your Salesforce projects. I hope and expect that you're going to gain some valuable insights and practical tips to help you revolutionize your own approach to Salesforce projects. So buckle up and get ready for an enlightening session. So with that, first let's talk about what are process maps? What are we even talking about when we talk about process maps? In the end, a process map really is just a visualization, a flowchart that visually shows the various steps involved in a particular process, and it's visually showing it in a way that anyone, whether they are brand new to the organization whether they are new to the project or they've been within the organization for some time, can quickly get up to speed with what the various steps are in a process, what comes before a particular step, what happens after a particular step. Now, as you can imagine, that visualization of a process map is what you could think of it, we're using the word map here. You can think of it really like any other type of map that we see in, let's say, Google Maps or on Waze, where there is a map that basically shows us here is what's going on as it relates to this particular process. And here are the steps that we need to take in order to get from point A to point B. But also by looking at the map, we can also start to identify opportunities to optimize the process. We can also identify opportunities to automate the process, or maybe by documenting what the steps are in a particular process, we might realize, holy cow, this is way more complex than necessary. There are far more steps within this process than we really should have. And some of these steps are remnants of old legacy processes or legacy technologies that we used to use before. And when a manager reviews the process map of what their team is doing, they realize, oh my gosh, they're still doing some of that stuff. It's not needed whatsoever. So we might even identify areas where we can eliminate various steps in the process. Now, none of that can be done if we don't have the actual documentation of the process map. So during this session, I am not going to be teaching you how to create the process map. I'm actually working on a course to teach that to Salesforce professionals because I'm starting to realize that is a huge gap on how to create a process map. But at the same time, what we are going to be focusing on are all of the different ways, or I should say, not all of, 7 key ways that process maps can bring clarity to your chaotic and out of control projects. Now, by the way, if some of you have had some experiences, either good or really bad experiences relating to process maps, maybe because a process map didn't exist and the type of chaos that it introduced to your organization, and perhaps you can even share a before and after scenario where perhaps after you created the process map, how it suddenly brought everyone onto the same page. Everyone was speaking the same language. You can feel free to raise your hand and I will bring you to the stage so you can share some of those experiences. I've had a million experiences like this myself that I can certainly share. But in the meantime, I'm going to jump in and start sharing with you the 7 key ways that process maps can help you bring some sanity and clarity to your Salesforce projects. So the first one is visualization of your complex processes. So what do we mean by that? Process maps provide a visual representation of the various steps involved in a particular process or even project. Because let's face it, most of the time when we, as Salesforce professionals, when we are focusing on a process, it's usually because that process is critical to the Salesforce project that we're working on. So that visualization that we're talking about, this is especially helpful in Salesforce implementations where the workflow can be complex and multifaceted. For example, let's say we're helping with a process for a college admissions office, and the college admissions office needs to collect all types of information and documentation from prospective students in the college. When they get that information, sometimes they need to delegate certain pieces off to other team members or maybe kick off another process. So let's say once they get the academic history in to the college admissions office, it then gets delegated over to another team to kick off another process. So that's what we mean by having complex and multifaceted processes, where one thing could suddenly kick off another process. Or maybe if it's a transfer student, then an entirely different element of the process needs to be introduced into the mix versus if it's not a transfer student, it's a much more simplistic process. By having the visualization of these complex processes can help simplify the complex procedures, making it far easier for everyone to now understand the process and their roles within that process. I can honestly tell you that about an hour ago, I finished a meeting with one of my clients where we were reviewing a process map. And I'm not going to share too many details about this particular client, but what I will say is that this client is in the healthcare industry. And we were focusing on some of the processes associated with the intake that happens. So, in other words, when a new patient is introduced to the organization, and when during the course of conversation, at one point, someone said, "Oh, yeah, as far as we're concerned," meaning the people that were participating in the meeting, "we only care about X, Y, and Z." And I turned to them and I said, "That's all fine and dandy, but let's zoom out a little bit and look at the process as a whole." The process map for intake of new prospective patients is far larger than just the attendees of this meeting. So when we talk about the process map and the various steps in the process, it's not only about you because you happen to be a participant in this meeting, it's what is the process for the entire organization as it relates to intake of new prospective patients. So it helps us visualize the complex processes. That's secret number one. Secret number two is that it helps keep our project scope under control. A very common reason for project failures is scope creep. Having process maps can effectively manage and control the scope of a project by providing a clear visualization of the entire workflow, of the entire process and all of the steps involved in the process, and the boundaries associated with the process. For example, if let's say we define the process or the project as everything that's associated to, let's keep it the example of the college admissions office, everything that's associated with the intake and handling of the college, of the prospective students to our college for the admissions process, it handles all of that. However, that we are drawing the line of what happens after a student is either accepted or rejected from the school. So in other words, if once they are accepted, the student wants to discuss more about financial aid, or the student wants to know more information about, okay, now how do I register? And how do I register for the blah, blah, blah program that you might have? That is outside of the scope of this particular project. By having the visualization of your process map, it helps us clearly define, clearly explain, clearly visualize, here's what is in scope for this project, and here's what is outside of the scope for this project. It might come up in conversation, but it's not within the scope of this particular project that we are focused on right now. And by having by having a process map when the scope of the project is in question, when a proposed change or a new requirement tries to extend the scope of the project, the impact on the process map can be seen very clearly, which allows us, being everyone who's involved in leading that project, to make a very informed decision about whether or not we want to or need to truly extend the scope of the project to include this new thing that is being discussed. Because I gave an example before where the new thing that's being discussed is what happens after the student is either accepted or rejected from the college. But what if the new thing that's being introduced is maybe including DocuSign for digital signing capability? for all of the steps involved and all of the processes involved in the college admissions process. So if that's the case, we need to still understand what is the scope of this particular project and what will be the impact of introducing digital signature capability into this scope. Will that help abbreviate some of the steps of the process? Will it now extend some of the steps in the process? And what type of implication will it have on the project timeline as well? So, secret number 2, it helps us keep the scope of our project under control. Secret number 3, by having process maps in your Salesforce projects, it will facilitate better communication. Process maps serve as a universal language that can bridge the gap between the technical and non-technical stakeholders that we are interacting with. And by doing that, it will enable the non-technical stakeholders to understand technical concepts and workflows much more efficiently and much more productively. And that is now going to promote transparency and help reduce misunderstandings as it relates to the project. Again, I'm going to give you an example from a project that I'm working on right now, and it's actually from the same meeting that I mentioned a few moments ago. So for that particular project, I came into this initiative, I came into this particular Salesforce project after they had already been using Salesforce for quite some time. I had nothing to do with the initial implementation. I have no idea who did the initial implementation, but essentially what they did was, instead of using any native Salesforce objects, they created a single custom Salesforce object, and they put absolutely everything into that one object in Salesforce. And essentially, each record in that object represents a referral that comes into that organization, which includes, on the referral, it includes things like first name and last name of the prospective patient, the emergency contact information for that prospective patient, the primary care physician for that prospective patient, the health insurance company that the patient is utilizing. All of that information. We're not talking about contacts. We're not talking about accounts. We're not even talking about custom objects to be substituted for the accounts object or the contacts object. Everything is on this singular object in Salesforce. So as all of you can imagine, when I first looked at this, my head exploded, and I basically said, this is horrible. Everything that represents a person needs to be on a contact object. Everything that represents an association or an organization or a company needs to be on the account object. Everything that represents a task needs to be on the native activities, tasks, or events objects, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, they had trouble understanding what's going to happen, David, when you get rid of our current database architecture. Where is everything going to go? I don't understand why you're making things so complicated. So again, this is going back to facilitating better communication. What I did was, during the meeting, I opened up LucidChart, which, by the way, a tool that I absolutely love when it comes to process mapping is LucidChart. I'm actually going to put it in the, hang on one second, I'm going to put it in the comments for this particular event, a link to start a free trial of LucidChart. So I opened up a blank page in LucidChart, and I basically drew some boxes, keeping it super simple. I drew one box to represent the custom object that they're currently using. And I basically used an analogy, and I explained this is living with a whole family in a studio apartment where everything is in one place, and you might feel it's super easy. You can't lose anything because everything is in one room. That's all there is. We don't have a separate bedroom versus dining room versus kitchen. Everything is in one place. And what I am suggesting, the way I plan on enhancing Salesforce for you, is by parsing out all of the things that represent people and put those in the contact object. And take everything that represents organizations and put that in the account object. Put everything that relates to the intake or enrollment or activities, put those in their own respective objects, so that this way you can associate a single person to multiple other intakes, enrollments, or maybe even associate them with other people by indicating here is how these two people are connected to each other. So just by drawing simple boxes and putting the lines between them to show how they relate to each other, I was able to overcome this hurdle of explaining very technical concepts to non-technical people. So that's secret number 3, facilitating better communication. Secret number 4, it helps us mitigate risks. Process maps can help identify potential risks and bottlenecks in the business processes that we're focusing on. By visualizing the workflow, project managers can more easily anticipate issues before they even occur and take preventative measures to help streamline the process, reducing the likelihood of project failure. Secret number 5, process maps help us improve efficiency within the organization. By mapping out processes and redundancies and inefficiencies, all of these things can be identified and eliminated. If we start to realize that it takes 4 or 5 or 12 or 38 steps in our process in order to determine who this prospect should get assigned to, we can look at all of these steps visually on a process in a digital document, and we can start asking probing questions of, okay, what exactly happens in this step? Who does it exactly? What criteria are they looking at? How do they do it exactly? And by asking those questions, we're uncovering certain things that we can potentially streamline, eliminate, or automate, thereby improving the efficiency of the workflow for the entire organization. So secret number 5 is improving efficiency through process maps. Secret number 6, the way that process maps can help us with our Salesforce projects is by strengthening stakeholder management. We all know what it's like when a stakeholder in our Salesforce projects come to us with some irrational, unexpected surprise, either issues or new processes or changes that they want to make, or the stakeholder says, yeah, whatever, I don't really care. Can you just go live with this thing, even though they don't know themselves what they're talking about? They just want the project to be done. They don't want to participate in any of the details. They don't care about any of the details. They don't even know what's involved in the project, but they just want the project to be done. By showing them the process map, as good or as bad as it is. So let's take 2 extremes. One extreme where your process map has, let's say, only 4 steps in the process, where your gut tells you that there's definitely far more complexity to this particular process than what's represented in this document. But these are the only steps that the business has shared with you. By showing that to the stakeholder who does not want to be involved, who wants the project to just go live already, by showing that process map to the stakeholder and say, this is all I have right now. I've got a whole bunch of questions. I still don't know. Nowhere on this process map does it tell us what are the pieces of information that need to be captured. Who is working on what step in the process? Where are they managing each of these steps right now? Are these truly the only steps involved in the entire process, Mr. or Ms. Stakeholder? Whoever you are that just wants the project to be done, does this document truly represent the end all and be all of our project, or is something missing here? And by showing them that half-baked process map, they will hopefully get very engaged and realize, yeah, I need to get involved here, there's definitely a whole lot of detail that's missing. Now, on the flip side, if let's say you have a process map that is overly complex, that is filled with boxes and lines and arrows going all over the place, and it's all showing accurately what the business has told you of what their process is, by sharing that with the stakeholder who is asking, can you just go live already? You can say, as of right now, we've only been able to configure the following piece of this gigantic process map. There's all of this other work that still needs to be done. And they're going to start to realize the magnitude of the level of effort involved in this particular project. Now, if the stakeholder is a very senior leader within the organization, they might turn to you and say, oh yeah, you know what? All of those things, they don't really need to be included here. We could take that out of the scope of the project. Okay, great. We just mark off, we update that process map in order to indicate all of these portions of the process map were deemed by this senior leader within the organization to no longer be relevant for this project. Maybe that is going to be project phase 2 of this particular project. So that will help us to further streamline the project scope itself so that we can meet whatever new deadline senior leadership wants us to work with. So secret number 6 is strengthening stakeholder management. Lastly, we have secret number 7 of how process maps can help us transform our Salesforce initiatives, and that relates to promoting continuous improvement. Now, once the project is actually live, once we're done with the project, these process maps are still 100% absolutely critical to the organization, because the process maps can serve as a blueprint for continual improvement of the processes, of the workflow, of the technology stack, of the data issues that we have within the organization. These process maps that we've created, even after the project is done, these process maps can be and should be adjusted and updated based on real-life performance data. And that will help promote a culture of continuous improvement, enhancing the value that came out of the Salesforce implementation that you worked on in the first place. So those are the 7 secrets of how process maps can help you with your Salesforce projects. With that, I want to keep us on time. We are at the 30-minute mark, and I promised you to keep it to 30 minutes. I'm sure you all have a lot going on today. So thank you for joining me today. I hope you found value from this session, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.